Writing. The sound of the old tractor coughing black smoke into the morning air made several wealthy guests laugh under their breath, but none of them laughed louder than Grayson Vale. The billionaire CEO stood beside his polished black SUV in an expensive Italian suit, sunglasses reflecting the bright golden sunlight stretching across the valley. He looked at the rust-covered tractor rattling toward the charity event entrance like it was an insult to the luxury ranch community itself. What Grayson didn't know in that humiliating moment was that the quiet single dad driving the old machine owned the massive $120 million ranch sitting right next to his own property. And before the day was over, everyone watching would learn a lesson about pride, grief, and the kind of wealth money could never buy. Before we begin this emotional story, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Wisdom Story House, if you believe kindness and second chances still matter in this world. Your support helps bring more meaningful stories like this to life. The morning sun spilled warmly across Cedar Ridge Valley, painting the rolling hills in shades of gold and green. Horses moved lazily across fenced pastures while expensive trucks and luxury cars lined the gravel entrance to the annual community fundraiser. Wealthy ranch owners, investors, and local politicians gathered beneath white tents decorated with flowers and polished wooden signs. The event was meant to celebrate prosperity and growth in the valley, but beneath the smiles and handshakes lived quiet competition, judgment, and pride. Elias Mercer arrived alone on his faded blue tractor because the engine in his pickup truck had died 2 weeks earlier, and he simply hadn't found the time to repair it. His hands were rough from work, his denim shirt carried dust from the fields, and exhaustion rested heavily behind his eyes. Sitting beside him on the tractor seat was his 7-year-old daughter, Maren, wearing a simple yellow dress and clutching a tiny bouquet of wildflowers she had picked at sunrise. Elias had once been a different man. Years ago, before tragedy hollowed out his world, he had laughed more easily. He had built fences with music playing from the barn and danced in the kitchen with his wife, Noelle, while supper burned on the stove. Together they had inherited the enormous Mercer Ranch from Elias's grandfather, a sprawling property hidden beyond the hills with endless acres of grazing land, timber, lakes, and untouched valleys. But after Noelle died during complications from an unexpected illness, Elias disappeared from public life. He stopped attending social gatherings. He stopped dressing like a wealthy ranch owner. He stopped caring what anyone thought. Only a handful of lawyers and financial advisors knew the true value of Mercer Ranch because Elias had quietly refused every corporate offer to sell. Developers had tried for years to buy sections of his land for resorts, golf courses, and luxury communities. He rejected all of them. To outsiders, he looked like a struggling farmer barely surviving. That illusion suited him perfectly. As Elias parked the tractor near the edge of the fundraiser, conversations slowed. Some guests exchanged amused glances while others whispered behind fake smiles. Grayson Vale noticed immediately. As the founder of Vale Horizon Enterprises, Grayson had spent decades building an empire through aggressive deals and ruthless negotiations. He admired power, prestige, and appearances. To him, success had to be visible. Grayson stepped forward with a smirk that carried the sharpness of a knife. Several guests gathered close enough to hear. Maren looked nervously at her father while clutching her flowers tighter. Grayson casually mocked the tractor loud enough for nearby attendees to hear, joking that the event had apparently expanded invitations to museum exhibits. Laughter spread through the crowd like dry grass catching fire. Elias simply climbed down slowly, helping Maren to the ground before brushing dirt from her shoes with gentle hands. The humiliation could have broken another man, but Elias remained calm in a way that unsettled people. He carried himself quietly, without the desperate need to defend his dignity. Years of grief had already stripped away his ego. Words no longer wounded him the way losing Noelle had. Maren looked up at her father with worried eyes. Elias smiled softly and handed her a folded napkin to wrap around the flower stems. Then he walked toward the refreshment tables without responding to Grayson at all. Somehow that silence embarrassed the CEO more than an argument would have. Throughout the afternoon, the fundraiser buzzed with speeches about growth and development. Investors discussed plans for luxury expansions in Cedar Ridge Valley while local ranchers debated water rights and land prices. Grayson stood at the center of every conversation, charming politicians and promising economic transformation. He announced plans to purchase additional neighboring properties for a high-end resort community that would attract elite buyers from across the country. But one property remained beyond his reach. Mercer Ranch. Grayson had tried repeatedly to contact its owner over the years, but negotiations always ended abruptly through lawyers. He had never met the mysterious owner personally. Rumors surrounded the ranch like fog. Some claimed an aging businessman owned it. Others believed it belonged to foreign investors. Few knew the truth. Later that afternoon, the fundraiser organizer approached the microphone to publicly thank several major landowners supporting conservation efforts in the valley. She began naming properties and contributions one by one. Applause echoed politely beneath the tent. Then she spoke the words that changed the entire atmosphere. She thanked Elias Mercer, owner of Mercer Ranch, for privately funding the new children's medical wing at Cedar Ridge Hospital, the local school scholarship program, and emergency drought relief for struggling farmers over the past 3 years. The silence that followed felt enormous. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died instantly. Faces turned toward Elias standing quietly near the lemonade table beside his daughter. Even the wind seemed to pause. Grayson's confident smile slowly disappeared. People stared at the dusty tractor outside with entirely different eyes now. Suddenly the worn denim shirt no longer looked pathetic. It looked honest. The weathered hands no longer appeared poor. They looked hard-working. And the quiet man everyone mocked moments earlier was revealed as one of the wealthiest landowners in the entire state. But the shock deepened further when the organizer explained that Elias had insisted every donation remain anonymous because he never wanted recognition. Marin looked confused by the sudden attention surrounding her father. Elias simply lowered his gaze, uncomfortable with public praise. He had not come for applause. He had only attended because Marin wanted to bring flowers for the fundraiser auction. Grayson's face tightened with humiliation as realization spread through the crowd. The billionaire CEO who measured worth through appearance had publicly mocked a man far wealthier than himself. But what truly disturbed him was discovering that Elias carried his wealth without arrogance. There was no revenge in Elias's expression. No smug satisfaction. Only quiet sadness. As the event continued awkwardly, several guests approached Elias with sudden respect, but he responded politely without changing his demeanor. Wealth had never been the center of his identity. The ranch mattered because it carried generations of family memories. Every fence post, trail, and oak tree connected him to people he loved. Near sunset, Marin wandered toward the horse paddocks behind the event tents while holding her tiny bouquet. A sudden loud crack from unstable temporary fencing startled the horses, sending one panicked animal charging across the field. Guests screamed and scattered in fear. Marin froze directly in the horse's path. Everything happened within seconds. Before anyone else reacted, Elias sprinted across the field with terrifying speed. Years of ranch work had hardened his body far beyond what his tired appearance suggested. He reached Marin just as the horse thundered toward them. Wrapping his arms around his daughter, he twisted sharply and shielded her beneath his body as the horse narrowly missed them. The crowd gasped. Dust rose into the glowing evening sunlight while Marin cried against her father's chest. Elias held her tightly, whispering comfort as his own breathing shook violently. For one brief moment, terror consumed him completely. Losing Noelle had nearly destroyed him. The thought of losing Marin too was unbearable. Grayson stood frozen nearby, watching the raw fear and love pouring from the single father's face. Something inside him cracked quietly. Because Grayson recognized that expression. Years earlier, before business consumed his life, Grayson's own marriage had collapsed under the weight of ambition. His wife left after years of emotional absence, taking their son with her across the country. Grayson buried his loneliness beneath endless work, luxury, and control. Standing there now, he suddenly saw the emptiness of his carefully constructed world. As the sun dipped lower behind the hills, Elias carried Maren back toward the tractor while comforting her gently. Her little fingers clung tightly to his shirt. Guests moved aside respectfully as he passed. Then something unexpected happened. Grayson stepped forward quietly and apologized. Not the polished apology of a businessman protecting his reputation. Not the rehearsed words of public relations. This apology came slower, rougher, and painfully sincere. He admitted he had judged Elias without knowing anything about him. He confessed that somewhere along the way he had forgotten how to see people beyond appearances. Elias studied him silently for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Because grief had taught him something powerful. Broken people often hurt others while trying to protect their own emptiness. And sometimes the strongest thing a person could offer was grace. The evening sky burned orange and crimson as guests slowly departed the fundraiser. Most carried home a story they would never forget. Not about wealth or status, but about humility. Before leaving, Maren walked over to Grayson and handed him one of her wildflowers from the bouquet. The billionaire stared down at the tiny flower resting awkwardly in his expensive hand. Something about that innocent gesture affected him more deeply than million-dollar business deals ever had. Over the following months, Cedar Ridge Valley began to change in small but meaningful ways. Grayson canceled plans for the luxury resort expansion that would have displaced struggling local families. Instead, he partnered with Elias to fund agricultural programs, veterinary clinics, and educational opportunities for ranch workers' children. For the first time in years, Grayson started spending time with his estranged son again, slowly rebuilding a relationship he once sacrificed for ambition. And Elias? He remained the same quiet man driving the old tractor across golden fields every morning beside his daughter. He still wore dusty denim shirts. Still fixed fences himself. Still avoided attention whenever possible. But something inside him softened after that day too. He realized grief no longer had to isolate him from the world forever. Some evenings, neighbors would spot Elias and Maren sitting on a hill overlooking the valley while sunlight faded across the enormous Mercer ranch. Maren would point excitedly toward distant horses while Elias listened with peaceful eyes. In those moments, the ranch no longer felt like a monument to loss. It felt like home again. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video with someone who still believes humility and kindness matter more than appearances. Stories like this remind us that the richest souls are often hidden beneath the simplest clothes. And before this story ends, comment below, true wealth lives in the heart. Because sometimes the person the world laughs at is carrying more strength, pain, and dignity than anyone could imagine. And sometimes life has a beautiful way of humbling those who forget that every human being deserves respect. On bright mornings in Cedar Ridge Valley, people still occasionally hear the sound of Elias Mercer's old tractor echoing across the hills. But now, whenever that familiar engine rattles through town beneath the warm daylight sun, nobody laughs anymore.